Before we begin our video today, just a brief word from our sponsor.
These nuts.
Got 'em. Is Breath of the Wild empty? Yes and hell no. Breath of the Wild is, in my opinion, one of the greatest video games of our time and of all time. It is undoubtedly on a different tier as far as video games go. The same tier to that of Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Witcher 3, uniquely setting a new standard for open world video games as far as quality goes. With that being said, the game has obviously been recognized for its greatness. Several 10 out of 10s by reviewers, an overall Metacritic score of 97. It won Game of the Year for 2017 and sold over 27 million copies to this date. Mind you, it's a $60 game on a single platform. Are we including the Wii U? Let's not do that, no. With that being said, there are people on this earth who enjoy the game far less than the majority. Of course, it's really down to personal preference, or maybe one of the game's several flaws stood out to them, which in turn hindered their entire game experience. But there's one argument that I hear time and time again, and that argument is that Breath of the Wild is empty. Today, we're gonna see if that statement actually holds some truth. So is Breath of the Wild really an empty game? Well, if you could infer from the title of this video, then you would have come to some sort of conclusion that sounds like, I strongly disagree with that sentiment, but will admit that it holds some truth.
Come on, where is the game part of this video game? It can't just be these bunches of tiny, mostly easy puzzle dungeons, these weak-ass divine beasts.
The game gives you 120 uninteresting puzzles so they can use them as fast travel points in the map.
What were you guys thinking that you give Breath of the Wild a Game of the Year in 2017? Like what? It has no story, there's no dungeons, there's no interesting side quest, the world is barren. I see people praising the physics. Guys, I don't play a Zelda game to mess around with the physics, man. No. I don't care about it. I want to play a Zelda game. When I buy a Zelda game, I want to play a Zelda game.
Okay, here are the facts. Breath of the Wild has a total of 120 shrines spread throughout the world, 100 of which are puzzle pieces, and 20 of which are simply tests of strength. Technically, there are 71 puzzle pieces, 20 tests of strength, and 29 blessing shrines, but the blessing shrines are obtained after completing a quest. Very often, critics of the game enjoy to downplay the actual amount of shrines that were in this game. Just because a blessing shrine holds nothing but a treasure chest doesn't mean you have to forget what you did to get it in the first place. There are 42 pieces of armor to collect, not including the DLC or amiibo armor, and in order to upgrade all of them, you have to spend a total of 1,716 items, not including the in-game, non-DLC, non-amiibo gear that is individualized from an armor set. If we were to include these pieces, such as the warm doublet or diamond circlet, this would equal over 2,000 items that you would have to collect in the overworld. This divides easily to hundreds of different item types, and that's just to fully upgrade all of your armor, a component in that adds to the game such that it can almost be referred to as a commodity. There are a total of 900 Korok seeds, again, all throughout the world. The Korok seeds serve as mini puzzles and challenges, or even just secret locations. These seeds can be exchanged for inventory slots, allowing you to carry more items. There are 16 or 15 completable main quests, with 76 side quests. Completing the main game takes an average of 50 hours, and to 100% takes an average of 189 hours. In conclusion, saying stupid shit like, where's the game, big as an ocean, deep as a puddle, makes you sound edgy, but not very intelligent. Kinda retarded, actually. Just because you didn't enjoy half of the shrines, or just because you found collecting the Korok seeds overly tedious, doesn't mean it wasn't present in the game. Just because the side quests and chests led to predictable or lackluster rewards, doesn't mean the game lacks continuity. Could the divine beasts and shrines have been a little more expansive, fleshed out, and intuitive? Absolutely, no doubt about that. I thought they did their job, however, using the in-game mechanics to provide at the very least some bit of ponderance. Sure, there were some shrines that required a pensive attitude, while others required very little brain power. However, this was easy or not sophisticated so it doesn't count approach is asinine. Again, there was the Eventide Shrine Quest, which was the most elaborate shrine quest in the game. Then, another which simply has the player shoot a lightning arrow in a particular location. Just because one of the shrines consisted of shooting a marked location and said shrine gave you nothing but a chest, doesn't mean the shrine wasn't there. I could even go as far as to say that if all the shrines were shitty, or if all the shrines were tests of strength, then it wouldn't make the game quote unquote empty, Dissatisfying, sure, but then empty isn't the correct term. Furthermore, the game isn't empty because the things in said game weren't your cup of tea. Oftentimes I hear the argument being made that Breath of the Wild is empty because it diverges from the more linear Zelda titles. Let me remind you that linear games such as the older Zelda games do not feel empty because the game is just that, linear. You're forced straight into the game's content until you have beaten all of said content. There isn't as much room for other aspects that might lead you to believe that a game is empty, such as exploration and more player agency. Let's take a quick look at one of the biggest linear games out right now, God of War Ragnarok. Yes, there are a bunch of side quests in hidden areas which require environmental interaction mixed with puzzle solving. Completing the game probably takes 30 hours, a good amount of time, but you wouldn't consider it an open world game such as Breath of the Wild or Red Dead Redemption 2. Because God of War Ragnarok isn't an open world game like Zelda Breath of the Wild or Red Dead Redemption 2, you wouldn't criticize it in the same manner as though it was an open world game, because it's not an open world game. It's the same thing with Breath of the Wild and some of the older Zelda titles. When comparing a game like Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild, you have to recognize that they aren't the same kind of game, such that you wouldn't assert the same expectations for the two games. Criticizing Breath of the Wild for not having as much action as a linear Zelda title, for instance Skyward Sword or like I said Twilight Princess, is stupid because Breath of the Wild has to fill the role of an open world game and not a linear one, because Breath of the Wild is an open world game. Back to the God of War example, no one would dare make the argument that that game is empty, but that is simply because it doesn't allow room for that particular kind of scrutiny. The game is in the structure of follow this path during character dialogue, run into enemies, story, run into a boss once in a while, repeat. In the case of the older Zelda games, it was go here, collect this item, finish up here, progress. But Breath of the Wild is an open world game and should not have to bear those same expectations. So, you have a game like Breath of the Wild, a game which is the first in a series to allow you to go to different places on your own accord, activate different main and side quests on your own accord, so on and so forth. It doesn't make said game quote-unquote empty because the shrine quests that you spent 30 minutes partaking in didn't satisfy your expectations, even if it justifiably didn't measure up to your expectations, or the reward for doing that side quest was lackluster. It doesn't warrant your criticism to be in a manner in which you get to discount that experience entirely. In that instance, you would have to base your argument with the assertion that a vast majority of the side quests led to unsatisfying or meaningless rewards, in which case would be a topic for another video and would be one that I would actually agree with. But as I was saying, Breath of the Wild has over 900 Koroks or mini puzzles, thousands of enemies scattered across the map, hundreds of different items, hundreds of food items, over 300 weapons, 120 shrines, 50 hours of main quest content, 72 side quests, 8 different regions. Damn near everything can interact with Link, and I haven't even covered everything. I think we can put to rest the argument that Breath of the Wild is empty, or at least stop saying dumb shit like they made an open world and forgot to put anything in it.
What?
Like, what? Like, if you need a doctor, just say that, okay? You know, there are people in this world that can help you if you think that your mental health is slowly declining. So to some, it may just seem like I'm writing this game like a rodeo show. Hey, yo, pause. Although the game isn't empty, and I do think it's literally retarded to make that claim with a straight face, I kind of see where you're coming from. What? Well, I mean, you can't just live in an echo chamber. Okay, look at the majority of stereotypes. Sure, they're mean and sometimes racist, but you can get ones like Asians can't drive, black people can't swim, and white people don't season their food.
Did we add salt and pepper? I think we needed salt and pepper.
No, there's no salt and pepper in it.
Are there lots of exceptions? Of course. There are lots of professional Asian drivers. Personally, I know lots of black people who can swim, including me because I'm a damn lifeguard, and Gordon Ramsay exists. But these stereotypes don't get conceptualized out of absolutely nowhere. I also literally provided you with visual evidence of all these stereotypes. So what does this have to do with Breath of the Wild? Well, when enough people say something about something, it could be the case that they are incorrect, but you also have to take a look at what led all those people into thinking a thing. In the case of Breath of the Wild being empty, no, there's more content in this game than most others. But that being said, the scale of Breath of the Wild allows for this content to be present along with some empty facets. The easiest example to go to when making this claim is looking at Gerudo Desert. Aside from there being, 2 mandatory main quests in Gerudo Desert, it's a pretty empty place. There were 5 shrines in the desert, and I'm not including the shrines that were blessing shrines. Okay, it may sound as though I'm contradicting my previous argument by now not including blessing shrines, However, some of these blessing shrines slash shrine quests actually require you to go outside of the desert in order to complete it. The desert is also unlike any other region in the game in the sense that it has no change in elevation. You can tell just by looking at the map of Hyrule that Gerudo Desert is the only location that is pure flat terrain. You would think that the desert would be filled with content given this fact, but no. Nintendo really made the desert live up to its name by deserting it of much variety. There's Gerudo Town, a few enemy camps, some rogue enemies, and dragon bones. Everything else is just sand though. Strangely enough, I believe this was done on purpose. I mean, there are locations within the desert called the Barrens or Dunes. Even if it was done on purpose, it would have been nice to see more content in the desert, as it was the only one of its kind in Breath of the Wild. So other than that, I can't really concur with the aforementioned argument. I still see where you might get the idea from, and that's because there is a lot of open space in some areas. But this space actually has a legitimate purpose. Now, we lose the appreciation for this ability the more and more we play the game. And if you are a critic of the game and thus didn't really enjoy it, which again, there's nothing wrong with, it makes sense that you did overlook or take this ability for granted. But the ability that I'm referring to is simply walking slash running around. You may think that this argument is contrived and the fact that I'm using it is stupid, but when you really think about it, walking and running is an option of movement, just like paragliding. Similarly, the foil between climbing and using Rivali's Gale. However, there are still players that may decide to walk and or physically climb, opposed to those who glide and or fast travel. To those players, the world has to be as realistic as possible. The space between monster camps and or engaging rogue enemies is vast for the purpose of making those monster encounters more meaningful and less monotonous than what it easily could be given the lack of enemy variety in the game. And still, in these vast stretches of blatant content, is content which serves the player with gathering materials, finding puzzles, and it overall just adds to the immersion of an open world. I mean, they fit 900 Koroxes into the entire world. Did you notice how well hidden most of them were? I believe I needed a guide after finding like, let's say 280, and the other 620 I looked up myself. There's also another big purpose for this empty space that I noticed, and that is region transition. I mean, imagine coming across two regions where it's night and day in terms of aesthetics, attributes, and the environments. It would be very weird and would feel unrealistic. This is why there are stretches of land which gradually change in order to make the change between the two connecting regions feel more realistic. I noticed this while making my way from Tabantha to Hebra. Hopefully this cleared up any confusion on this subject, but I mean, let me know in the comment section down below. Am I wrong? Is Breath of the Wild an empty game? You know, I actually do appreciate your comments, no matter how well they're written or how poorly they're written. But above all else, have a good rest of your day.